In 2008, while the world watched banks collapse, one man was quietly building an empire that would steal more money than most countries earn in a year. The scheme was so simple, so elegant, that even the smartest people on Wall Street couldn't see it. How do you hide a billion-dollar scam in plain sight? Bernard Lawrence Madoff ran the largest Ponzi scheme in human history from a quiet office on the 17th floor of the Lipstick Building in Midtown Manhattan. For nearly 2 decades, he convinced thousands of investors, charities, and even sophisticated hedge funds that he had cracked the code to consistent, impossible returns. By the time federal agents arrested him in December 2008, he had stolen approximately $65 billion in reported account balances, with actual losses estimated at $18 billion. This wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow bleed that lasted from the early 1990s until the global financial crisis finally exposed what regulators had missed for years. The story matters now because every element that allowed Madoff to succeed, every warning sign that was ignored, every structural weakness he exploited, still exists in our financial system today. Bernard Madoff started his legitimate broker-dealer firm in 1960 with $5,000 he earned as a lifeguard and sprinkler installer. For decades, he built a reputation as an innovator who helped create the NASDAQ electronic trading system. He served as chairman of the NASDAQ Stock Exchange and sat on industry advisory boards. Nobody suspected that somewhere along the way, likely in the early 1990s, his investment advisory business had become entirely fraudulent. The scheme worked with devastating simplicity. Madoff told clients he was using a split-strike conversion strategy that involved buying blue-chip stocks and using options to protect against losses. He sent them monthly statements showing steady gains of 10 to 12% annually, even when the broader market crashed. New investors' money paid the returns of earlier investors. No actual trading occurred in the investment advisory accounts. It was the oldest con in finance, just executed with extraordinary patience and sophistication. How do you fake 2 decades of trades without getting caught? The operation ran from a separate floor of his office, isolated from the legitimate broker-dealer business downstairs. Madoff's sons worked in the legitimate trading operation and later stated they knew nothing about the fraud. The advisory business operated with shocking informality for an operation managing billions. A handful of employees generated false trading records using outdated computer systems. Account statements were printed and mailed to clients who rarely questioned the results because the returns, while impressive, weren't so outrageous as to trigger immediate suspicion. Red flags appeared constantly, but the financial world ignored them. In 1999, financial analyst Harry Markopolos submitted a detailed report to the SEC titled, "The World's Largest Hedge Fund is a Fraud," after just 4 hours of analyzing Madoff's returns. He proved mathematically that the claimed options trading volume exceeded the entire market's capacity. The SEC investigated Madoff multiple times between 1992 and 2008, but never examined the investment advisory business closely enough to discover the fraud. The scheme survived because of 3 pillars. First, exclusivity. Madoff deliberately cultivated an aura of selectivity, sometimes turning away potential investors to make his fund seem more desirable. Second, affinity fraud. He targeted Jewish country clubs, charities, and networks where trust moved quickly through personal connections. Third, feeder funds. Instead of accepting most investors directly, he worked through intermediaries who collected fees for bringing him billions in assets, giving these intermediaries a financial incentive not to ask hard questions. The empire collapsed not through investigation but through mathematics. When the 2008 financial crisis hit, panicked investors wanted their money back. By early December, redemption requests reached $7 billion. Madoff had perhaps $300 million in actual assets. On December 10, 2008, he told his sons the truth. They reported him to federal authorities. The next morning, FBI agents arrested him at his apartment. His first words were reportedly, "I know why you're here." The evidence of Madoff's guilt emerged quickly and overwhelmingly once investigators accessed his records. Federal prosecutors documented that no actual securities purchases had occurred in the investment advisory accounts for at least 13 years. The trades listed on client statements simply never happened. When agents examined the computer systems used to generate these statements, they found primitive software that existed solely to fabricate transaction records. Bank records confirmed the basic Ponzi structure. Money from new investors flowed into a single Chase Manhattan bank account. Withdrawals to earlier investors came from that same account. Occasionally, when the balance ran low, Madoff would move funds from his legitimate broker-dealer operation to cover redemptions. During the final years, he allegedly kept portions of incoming funds for personal use, including maintaining luxury homes and funding a lavish lifestyle. Independent verification came from multiple sources. The Depository Trust Company, which clears most U.S. securities transactions, confirmed that Madoff's firm showed virtually no activity in the investment advisory accounts. Options exchanges verified that the volume of trades Madoff claimed to make exceeded the total contracts available in the market. Former employees, granted immunity, described the daily routine of fabricating documents in sealed interviews with prosecutors. Madoff himself provided the final confirmation. In his March 2009 guilty plea, he stated to the court, "I am actually grateful for this opportunity to publicly comment about my crimes, for which I am deeply sorry and ashamed." He admitted that the investment advisory business had been fraudulent from the beginning, though he later gave inconsistent accounts about exactly when the scheme started. He pleaded guilty to 11 federal felonies including securities fraud, wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, and perjury. Several aspects of the Madoff case remain disputed or unclear despite the overwhelming evidence of the core fraud. The most significant debate centers on when exactly the Ponzi scheme began. Madoff told different stories at different times. In some accounts, he claimed the fraud started in the early 1990s during a market downturn when he couldn't meet redemptions. Other evidence suggests problematic practices may have begun earlier, though proving this has been difficult because records from the 1970s and 1980s are incomplete. The question of who else knew remains contentious. Madoff consistently maintained that he acted alone and that his family members, including his brother Peter and sons Mark and Andrew, had no knowledge of the fraud. Federal prosecutors apparently believed this claim, as they never charged family members with fraud conspiracy, though Peter Madoff eventually pleaded guilty to falsifying documents and agreed to serve 10 years in prison for his limited role. Some victims and investigators argued this account was implausible given the operation's scale and duration, but no evidence emerged to contradict it conclusively. The SEC's repeated failures to detect the fraud sparked intense debate about regulatory competence versus regulatory capture. The SEC's Inspector General found that investigators displayed a troubling lack of fundamental understanding about securities fraud and approached Madoff with a degree of deference and credulous acceptance of his explanations. Whether this represented incompetence, insufficient resources, or subtle bias toward a well-connected industry figure remained a subject of dispute. Some financial professionals who fed billions into Madoff's funds claimed they had no way to know about the fraud, while others argued that basic due diligence should have revealed red flags obvious to any sophisticated investor. The human cost of Madoff's fraud extended far beyond mere numbers on spreadsheets. Thousands of individuals saw their retirement savings evaporate overnight. Charities that had relied on steady returns from Madoff investments suddenly faced closure. The Elie Wiesel Foundation for Humanity lost $15 million, essentially its entire endowment. Several victims faced such devastating financial and emotional consequences that they took their own lives. Many victims faced a cruel secondary trauma. Because Madoff had been fabricating returns for years, some investors who had withdrawn more money than they originally invested received letters from the bankruptcy trustee, demanding they return these fictitious profits. Understanding how Madoff succeeded requires grasping a fundamental truth about financial fraud. The scheme worked not because it was technically sophisticated, but because it exploited basic human psychology. The broader significance extends beyond one man's crimes. Madoff's scheme revealed systematic weaknesses in how we regulate, verify, and trust financial institutions. Financial systems ultimately run on trust. You deposit money in a bank trusting it will be there tomorrow. You invest in a fund trusting the manager will actually buy securities. You rely on regulators trusting they will catch fraud before it destroys lives. Now the question becomes, what happened next and what did we actually learn? The immediate legal aftermath unfolded with unusual speed. Judge Denny Chin sentenced Madoff to 150 years in federal prison in June 2009. Madoff died in prison on April 14, 2021. The recovery process for victims has been unexpectedly successful compared to typical fraud cases. Trustee Irving Picard has recovered approximately $14 billion of the $18 billion in actual losses. The regulatory response included reforms to SEC procedures and increased scrutiny of investment advisors, though experts debate whether these changes address the fundamental problems exposed by the Madoff case. This documentary synthesizes information from federal court records, SEC investigative reports, congressional testimony, trustee recovery filings, and contemporaneous news reporting from 2008 to 2024. All factual claims are documented with sources. The legal proceedings described are matters of public record. Bernard Madoff pleaded guilty and was convicted. This video represents journalism based on public records and is not legal or financial advice. The situation continues to develop as recovery efforts proceed.